The peacock's shriek tore through the morning stillness like a mountain lion's scream, and Xavier Lawson dropped his coffee mug straight into the dirt outside his cabin, his hand already reaching for the rifle that was not there because he had finally, after 3 years of living alone in this God-forsaken stretch of Texas countryside, stopped carrying it to breakfast. Xavier stood frozen, heart hammering against his ribs, scanning the horizon beyond his modest ranch for whatever creature had made that ungodly sound. The year was 1878, and in all his 26 years of living, he had never heard anything quite like it. His cattle were lowing nervously in their pen, and his mare was stamping in the small stable he had built with his own 2 hands. Then he saw it, a flash of iridescent blue and green moving through the scrub brush near the old Henderson property, which had sat empty for the better part of a year since the elderly couple had passed within months of each other. The peacock emerged into full view, strutting with a confidence that seemed almost absurd given the harsh landscape of Gonzales County. Its tail feathers dragged behind it like some kind of royal train, completely impractical for the dusty terrain. Xavier watched in bewilderment as the bird made its way toward his property line, stopping occasionally to peck at the ground. "What in the hell?" Xavier muttered, bending to retrieve his coffee mug. The ceramic had cracked clean in half. A woman's voice carried across the distance, melodic and slightly exasperated. "Ulysses! Ulysses, you get back here right this instant." Xavier squinted against the morning sun and saw her then, emerging from behind the Henderson house, which apparently was not abandoned anymore. She wore a simple calico dress in shades of blue, her dark blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun, and she was running, actually running, after the peacock with her skirts hiked up just enough to show sturdy brown boots underneath. "Ulysses, I swear if you bother the neighbors on our very first morning here, I will never forgive you." The peacock, apparently named Ulysses, ignored her completely and continued his journey toward Xavier's property. The woman finally stopped running, placed her hands on her hips, and looked directly at Xavier across the distance that separated them. "I am so sorry," she called out. "He is normally better behaved than this." Xavier found himself walking toward his fence line without consciously deciding to do so. Up close, he could see that the woman was probably close to his own age, maybe a year or 2 younger, with a face that was more interesting than pretty, full of character and intelligence. Her eyes were a warm brown and they crinkled at the corners as if she smiled often. "That your bird?" Xavier asked, knowing it was a stupid question the moment it left his mouth. "Unfortunately, yes," the woman said, slightly breathless from her chase. "I am Beatrice Pruitt. I just moved into the Henderson place. Well, I suppose it is the Pruitt place now, technically. I bought it from their daughter back in Missouri." "You came from Missouri?" Xavier asked, watching as Ulysses investigated a fence post with great interest. "Originally from Ohio, but most recently from Missouri, yes. I needed a change of scenery and a place where I could set up my quilting business properly. The Henderson daughter showed me drawings of the house and the land, and it seemed perfect." Beatrice smiled, though Xavier noticed it did not quite reach her eyes. "I did not expect Texas to be quite so hot in September, I must admit." "It cools down eventually," Xavier said, then added, "I am Xavier Lawson. I have the ranch here, just me and some cattle and my horse." "Just you?" Beatrice asked, and there was something careful in the way she said it, as though she were trying to determine if she had moved next to a married man or a bachelor. "Just me," Xavier confirmed. He hesitated, then added, "My parents died 5 years ago, fever. I have been working the ranch alone since then." "I am sorry for your loss," Beatrice said, and she sounded like she meant it. "I lost my mother 2 years ago, My father passed when I was 16. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, two people who had known too much loss, until Ulysses let out another piercing shriek that made them both jump. "Does he do that often?" Xavier asked, wincing. Beatrice laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her whole face. "More often than I would like. He is very dramatic. I inherited him from an elderly woman I used to make quilts for. She passed last year and had no family, and I could not bear to see him go to just anyone. He has been with me through some difficult times." Xavier nodded slowly, studying the peacock. The bird had settled down and was now preening its tail feathers with an air of supreme self-satisfaction. "I have never seen a peacock in Texas before." "I imagine you have not seen many peacocks anywhere," Beatrice said. "They are not exactly common. But Ulysses is special. He has a sense about people. He only makes a fuss around those he thinks need livening up." "Is that so?" Xavier said, and he could not quite keep the skepticism out of his voice. "It is," Beatrice said firmly. "When I was at my lowest point after my mother died, Ulysses barely made a sound for months. He was quiet and somber right alongside me. Then, when I finally started to heal, he became his dramatic self again." Xavier did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. He had never been good with words, especially not with women. His mother used to despair of him ever finding a wife, given how tongue-tied he became around the opposite sex. After his parents died, he had retreated further into himself, finding it easier to deal with cattle and horses than with people who might ask questions or expect him to be anything other than what he was. A cautious man who had learned the hard way that life could snatch away everything you loved in an instant. "Well," Beatrice said after a moment, "I should let you get back to your mourning, and I should try to coax this ridiculous bird back home. I have a lot of unpacking to do. Need any help?" The words were out of Xavier's mouth before he could stop them, and he immediately regretted them. What was he thinking, offering to help a strange woman unpack? She would think him forward or strange or both, but Beatrice's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "That would be wonderful, actually. The freight wagon dropped off all my things yesterday afternoon, and it is rather overwhelming to look at all those boxes and crates. I would be happy to make lunch in exchange for some assistance." Xavier found himself nodding before his cautious nature could talk him out of it. "Let me take care of my animals first, then I will come over." "Perfect," Beatrice said, then turned her attention back to the peacock. "Come on, Ulysses, let us go home and let Mr. Lawson finish his breakfast." To Xavier's surprise, the peacock immediately began walking back toward the Henderson house, or rather the Pruitt house, as if he had only been waiting for the invitation. Beatrice followed behind him, and Xavier watched them go, wondering what exactly he had just agreed to. An hour later, after feeding his cattle and horse and changing into a clean shirt, Xavier found himself walking up to his neighbor's front door. The house was smaller than his own but well built, with a wide porch that wrapped around two sides. He could see through the open door that the interior was indeed full of wooden crates and boxes, stacked haphazardly in what appeared to be the main living area. "Mr. Lawson," Beatrice called from somewhere inside. "Please come in." Xavier stepped through the doorway and was immediately struck by the colors. Quilts were draped over several of the boxes, and even folded as they were, he could see the intricate patterns and vibrant hues. There were quilts with geometric designs, others with elaborate floral patterns, and still others that seemed to tell stories in fabric. "These are beautiful," he said, and he meant it. Beatrice emerged from what must have been the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Thank you. Quilting is my life's work. I have been sewing since I was 6 years old. My mother taught me." "You sell them?" "I do." I take commissions, mostly. People write to me describing what they want, and I create it for them. Wedding quilts, anniversary quilts, quilts to commemorate a birth or a life. Each one is unique. She gestured around the room. These are some of my samples, and also some personal pieces I could never bear to sell. Xavier moved closer to examine one of the quilts, a stunning creation in shades of blue and gold that seemed to capture the exact quality of a summer sky. You made this. I did. That one took me 3 months. Every stitch is by hand. Beatrice came to stand beside him, and he caught the faint scent of lavender and clean cotton. It is based on the view from my mother's bedroom window back in Ohio. I made it the year after she died, trying to capture what she loved most about summer mornings. There was such love and longing in her voice that Xavier felt something crack open in his chest, some wall he had built to keep the world at a safe distance. She would have loved it, he said quietly. I think so too. Beatrice cleared her throat and stepped back, the moment of vulnerability passing. Well, I suppose we should start unpacking. I was thinking the kitchen first, since I need to be able to cook. Then we can tackle the bedroom and the workroom. They fell into an easy rhythm, with Beatrice directing where things should go, and Xavier providing the muscle to move the heavier crates and boxes. She talked as they worked, telling him about her journey from Missouri, about the challenges of transporting a Peacock across state lines, about her hopes for establishing her quilting business in Texas. There is a demand for quality quilts everywhere, she explained, carefully arranging her good china in the kitchen cupboard. And the truth is, I needed a fresh start. Too many memories in Missouri. Too many people who looked at me with pity because I was the spinster quilter lady whose mother died and who never married. Xavier, in the process of hauling a particularly heavy trunk into the bedroom, paused. People said that to you. Not to my face, usually, but I heard the whispers. Poor Beatrice, all alone in the world. Such a shame she never found a husband, as if being unmarried was somehow a tragedy worse than death. Beatrice's voice held an edge of bitterness. I am 24 years old, Mr. Lawson. By the standards of our society, I am practically an old maid. But I have a successful business, a home of my own, and I answer to no one but myself. I consider that rather fortunate. 24 is not old, Xavier said, setting the trunk down, and there is nothing wrong with being independent. Beatrice looked at him with surprise and something that might have been gratitude. Thank you for saying that. Not many men would agree with you. Well, I am not most men. Xavier realized how that might sound and quickly added, I mean, I understand about wanting to be left alone. People in town used to try to set me up with various women after my parents died. They meant well, but they did not understand that I was not ready, that I might never be ready. And are you? Beatrice asked softly. Ready, I mean. Xavier opened his mouth, then closed it. The honest answer was that he did not know. For 3 years, he had lived in a kind of stasis, going through the motions of life without really living. He worked his ranch. He went into Gonzales town for supplies. He exchanged pleasantries with the other ranchers and townsfolk, but he held everyone at arm's length. It was safer that way. Less chance of losing someone else he cared about. But standing here in Beatrice Pruitt's new home, surrounded by her beautiful quilts and listening to her talk about fresh starts and independence, Xavier felt something stirring inside him that he had thought long dead. Hope, maybe, or possibility. I do not know, he finally said. But I think I might be getting there. They worked through the late morning and into the early afternoon, and true to her word, Beatrice made lunch. It was simple fare, bread and cheese and cold chicken she had brought with her, but they ate it on the porch while Ulysses wandered the yard, occasionally stopping to display his magnificent tail feathers. He is showing off for you, Beatrice said. watching the peacock with amusement. Why would he do that? Because he likes you. I told you he has a sense about people. Beatrice took a bite of bread and chewed thoughtfully. He has only displayed his feathers for 3 people since I have had him. The woman who originally owned him, my mother, and now you. I think it means something. It means he is a peacock, Xavier said, but there was no heat in his words. That is what they do. You are very practical, Mr. Lawson. Someone has to be, especially if you are going to make claims about mind-reading peacocks. Beatrice laughed, and Xavier found himself smiling in response. It felt strange, the muscles in his face almost forgotten how to do it. When was the last time he had genuinely smiled? When was the last time he had sat with someone and felt this comfortable? Tell me about your ranch, Beatrice said. What do you raise? Cattle, mostly. Texas Longhorns. They are hardy and do well in this climate. I have about 50 head right now, which is manageable for one person. I sell them every fall to the buyers who come through. It is not a fortune, but it keeps me fed and the property maintained. You ever think about expanding? Xavier shrugged. Sometimes. But expansion means hiring help, and hiring help means trusting people to work as hard as you do and care about the ranch as much as you do. I have not found anyone who fits that description. Or you have not looked very hard, Beatrice said gently. Maybe, Xavier admitted. It is easier to do things myself. Then if something goes wrong, I have no one to blame but me. That sounds like a lonely way to live. It is. But it is also safe. Beatrice set down her plate and turned to look at him directly. Mr. Lawson, may I tell you something that my mother told me before she died? Of course. She said that safety is an illusion. That no matter how carefully we plan, no matter how high we build our walls, life will find a way to surprise us. The only difference is whether we spend our time before that surprise living fully or merely existing. Xavier felt those words hit him like a physical blow. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman. She was, and she was right. I spent a year after her death merely existing. I went through the motions. I made my quilts and I sold them and I kept my house clean, but I was not living. I was hiding, just like you are hiding here on your ranch. I am not hiding, Xavier protested, but even as he said it, he knew it was not entirely true. You are not living either, Beatrice said. And I say that not as a criticism, but as someone who recognizes the same pattern in you that I finally recognized in myself. We have both lost people we loved. We have both been hurt by life. But we are still here, Mr. Lawson. We are still breathing and walking around and capable of joy if we allow ourselves to feel it. Xavier stood up abruptly, suddenly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. I should get back to my ranch. I have chores to do before evening. If Beatrice was offended by his sudden departure, she did not show it. She simply stood as well and smiled at him. Thank you for your help today. It would have taken me twice as long without you. You are welcome. Xavier hesitated at the porch steps, then turned back. Miss Pruitt, would it be all right if I came by tomorrow to check if you need anything else? Her smile widened. I would like that very much. And please call me Beatrice. We are neighbors after all. Then you should call me Xavier. All right, Xavier. I will see you tomorrow. As Xavier walked back to his ranch, he could hear Ulysses crying out behind him, that strange piercing shriek that no longer seemed quite so alarming. He looked back once and saw Beatrice on her porch, one hand raised in farewell, the peacock strutting at her feet. Something in his chest tightened and he had to look away. That night, lying in his bed and staring at the ceiling, Xavier replayed the day in his mind. He thought about Beatrice's quilts, each one a story told in fabric and thread. He thought about her words regarding safety being an illusion and merely existing versus truly living. He thought about how easy it had been to talk to her, how natural it had felt to work alongside her. And he thought about how, for the first time in 3 years, he was looking forward to tomorrow. True to his word, Xavier showed up at Beatrice's house the next morning, this time bringing fresh eggs from the chickens he kept. She greeted him with delight and insisted on making breakfast, which they ate together on the porch while Ulysses performed his elaborate courtship display for the benefit of absolutely no one. "I was thinking about going into town tomorrow," Beatrice said as she cleared their plates. "I need to introduce myself to the shopkeepers and let them know I am available for commissions. Would you mind showing me the way? I have a rough idea from the map, but I would feel better having someone with me the first time." "Of course," Xavier said. "We can take my wagon. It is more comfortable than riding." The next day dawned clear and hot, and they set out for Gonzales in the early morning to beat the worst of the heat. Beatrice wore a different dress, this one in a pretty green that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes, and a bonnet to protect her face from the sun. She had left Ulysses at home, much to the Peacock's vocal displeasure. "He will be fine," Beatrice assured Xavier as they rattled down the dirt road. "I left him plenty of food and water, he just does not like being left behind." "Does he ever attack people?" Xavier asked, suddenly curious. "I have heard peacocks can be aggressive. Ulysses, no, he is all show. Though he did chase off a traveling salesman once who was being rather aggressive about trying to sell me a set of encyclopedias I did not want. I think he sensed my discomfort." There you go again, attributing human emotions to a bird. And there you go again, being overly practical. Beatrice nudged him gently with her elbow. "Would it kill you to believe in a little magic, Xavier? I have seen too much of the world to believe in magic. Or perhaps you have seen too much of the world not to." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking and the landscape rolling past them. The countryside was brown and dry, typical for September in Texas, but there was a stark beauty to it that Xavier had come to appreciate over the years. The endless sky, the way the heat shimmered on the horizon, the resilient plants that found a way to survive despite the harsh conditions. "It is beautiful here," Beatrice said, as if reading his thoughts. "Completely different from Ohio or Missouri, but beautiful in its own way." "You think so?" "Most people who come from back east find it too harsh." "I suppose I am not most people," Beatrice smiled. "I like that it is challenging. It feels honest somehow, like the land is not trying to be anything other than what it is." Xavier considered that. "I never thought of it that way, but you are right. There is an honesty to this place. You cannot pretend here. The land strips away all the pretense and shows you what you are really made of." "And what are you made of, Xavier Lawson?" He glanced at her, surprised by the question. "I do not know any more. I used to think I knew. I was going to expand the ranch, maybe get married, have a family. But then my parents died and all those plans seemed foolish. Like I had been building sandcastles without realizing the tide was coming in." "So you stopped building anything at all?" "I suppose I did." "That seems like a waste," Beatrice said gently. "You strike me as someone with a lot to offer. You are kind and strong and thoughtful. You would make some woman very happy." Xavier felt heat rise in his cheeks that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. "I am not looking to make any woman happy. I told you I am not ready for that. And I told you I understood." Beatrice turned to look out at the passing landscape. "I am not looking for a husband either, for what it is worth. I have my business and my independence, and I like my life the way it is. I was simply making an observation." They rode the rest of the way into town without speaking, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. Xavier found himself stealing glances at Beatrice, noticing the way the sunlight caught in her hair, the determined set of her jaw, the capable way she held herself. She was unlike any woman he had ever met, and that both attracted and frightened him. Gonzales was a modest town, built up around a central square where the old mission had once stood. There was a general store, a bank, a saloon, a small hotel, and various other establishments that served the ranchers and farmers in the surrounding area. Xavier helped Beatrice down from the wagon and watched as she straightened her bonnet and smoothed her skirts. "Do I look presentable?" she asked. "You look fine." "Fine. That is the best you can do." Xavier felt a smile tugging at his lips. "You look very nice, Beatrice." "Professional and capable. That is better." She took a deep breath. "All right, let us go introduce the Quilter to Gonzales, Texas." They spent the next several hours making the rounds. Beatrice introduced herself to the owner of the general store, a heavy-set woman named Mrs. Chen, who was delighted to hear about Beatrice's quilting business, and immediately commissioned a quilt for her daughter's upcoming wedding. At the bank, the manager was polite but uninterested until Beatrice mentioned that she had brought her life savings with her from Missouri and needed to open an account. Suddenly, he was very interested indeed. Xavier watched all this with a mixture of admiration and amusement. Beatrice was fearless in a way he could never be, walking into these establishments and essentially selling herself and her skills without a hint of embarrassment or hesitation. She was friendly but professional, warm but businesslike, and she had a way of making people feel like they were the most important person in the world when she talked to them. By early afternoon, Beatrice had secured 3 commissions and made connections with half a dozen potential customers. She was glowing with success as they headed back to the wagon. "That went even better than I hoped," she said, practically bouncing with excitement. "Mrs. Chen alone is going to keep me busy for the next month, and if I do a good job on her daughter's wedding quilt, I am sure she will recommend me to others." "You did well," Xavier said, and he meant it. "You are good at this. I love what I do. That makes it easy to talk about it." Beatrice looked at him thoughtfully. "You should try it sometime." "Try what?" "Loving what you do. Being excited about something, letting yourself feel." There it was again, that gentle but insistent pushing against the walls he had built around himself. Xavier wanted to be annoyed, but he found he could not muster the energy. Beatrice was not wrong after all. He had spent 3 years going through the motions, and what did he have to show for it? A ranch that was barely breaking even and a life that was functional but empty. "Maybe I will," he said quietly. They stopped at the hotel for a late lunch before heading home. The dining room was nearly empty at that hour, and they sat by a window overlooking the main street. Beatrice ordered chicken and dumplings, and Xavier got a steak with potatoes. They talked about inconsequential things while they ate, the kind of easy conversation that came naturally when 2 people were comfortable with each other. "Xavier," Beatrice said as they were finishing their meal, "can I ask you something personal, I suppose? Why did you help me that first day? When Ulysses wandered over to your property, you could have just told me to retrieve him and gone about your business. But instead, you offered to help me unpack. Why?" Xavier set down his fork and considered the question. Why had he helped her? The easy answer was that he was being neighborly, but that was not the whole truth. "I honestly do not know. Something about you made me want to help. Maybe it was the Peacock, which was so ridiculous I could not quite believe it was real. Or maybe it was that you seemed like you needed a friend, and I realized I did too." "Do you think we are friends now?" Beatrice asked softly. "I think we might be getting there." She smiled, and it lit up her whole face. "Good, I am glad. I have not had a real friend in a long time. People in Missouri were either customers or acquaintances, but no one I could really talk to, not the way I talk to you. I feel the same way." Xavier hesitated, then added, "It is nice, having someone nearby." I did not realize how lonely I had become until you showed up with that ridiculous bird of yours. Ulysses is not ridiculous. He is majestic. He is ridiculous and majestic. Both can be true." They laughed together, and Xavier felt that crack in his chest widen a little more, letting in more light. The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant pattern. Xavier would finish his morning chores and then walk over to Beatrice's house, where they would have coffee on the porch while Ulysses strutted around the yard. Sometimes he would help her with tasks around her property, fixing a loose board on the porch or reinforcing a fence post. Other times they would just talk, sharing stories about their pasts and their hopes for the future. Beatrice's quilting business took off quickly. Word spread about the talented quilter who had moved into the old Henderson place, and soon she was getting commissions not just from Gonzales but from surrounding towns as well. Xavier marveled at her skill, watching as she transformed simple fabric into complex works of art. She worked long hours, often sewing by lamplight late into the evening, but she never complained. "I love it," she told him one afternoon as she worked on a particularly elaborate pattern. "Every quilt tells a story. This one is for a couple celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. See how I have incorporated symbols from their life together. This section represents their farm, and here are their children, represented by different flowers." "How do you think of all this?" Xavier asked, genuinely curious. "I talk to them. I ask questions about their lives, what matters to them, what they want to remember. Then I translate that into fabric and thread." Beatrice looked up from her work. "It is not so different from what you do, really. You take care of the land and your animals, making sure everything thrives. I take care of people's memories, making sure they last." "I never thought of it that way." "You should. What you do is important too, Xavier. You just do not give yourself enough credit." As autumn deepened, Xavier found himself spending more and more time at Beatrice's house. He told himself it was because she needed help, because it was the neighborly thing to do, but the truth was simpler and more complicated. He enjoyed being around her. She made him laugh. She challenged him. She made him think about things he had avoided thinking about for years. And somewhere along the way, without quite meaning to, Xavier started to fall in love with her. It happened slowly, like the changing of seasons, subtle until suddenly it was undeniable. He noticed it in the way his heart lifted when he saw her smile, the way he looked forward to their morning coffee with an intensity that surprised him, the way he found excuses to touch her hand or stand close to her, breathing in that scent of lavender and cotton that was uniquely hers. But Xavier was cautious by nature, and he said nothing. What if she did not feel the same way? What if he ruined their friendship by revealing feelings she did not share? Better to stay silent and keep what they had than risk losing everything. October arrived with slightly cooler temperatures and the promise of fall, though in Texas that promise was always kept more in theory than in practice. Xavier was mending a section of fence on his property when he saw Beatrice running toward him, her skirts hiked up and her face flushed. "Xavier." She called, and there was panic in her voice. "Xavier, please help." He dropped his tools and ran to meet her. "What is wrong? What happened?" "It is Ulysses. He is hurt. I do not know what happened. I found him in the yard, and there is blood, and he will not move, and I do not know what to do." The words tumbled out of her in a rush, and Xavier could see tears streaming down her face. "Show me," he said, and they ran back to her property together. Ulysses was lying in a crumpled heap near the porch, his magnificent tail feathers spread out around him. There was indeed blood, a dark stain on the ground near his left wing. Xavier approached carefully, kneeling beside the bird. Ulysses made a weak sound, not his usual shriek, but something pitiful and small. "It looks like something attacked him," Xavier said, gently examining the peacock. "See these marks? They look like bites, probably a coyote or a fox. Can you help him?" Beatrice asked, kneeling beside Xavier. "Please, I know he is just a bird, but he means so much to me. He is all I have left of so many people I loved." "He is not just a bird," Xavier said firmly. "And yes, I can help. The wounds are not too deep and nothing seems broken, but we need to clean him up and bind his wing." They worked together for the next hour, carefully cleaning Ulysses's wounds and wrapping his injured wing with strips of cloth. The peacock bore it all with surprising dignity, as if he understood they were trying to help. Beatrice talked to him the whole time, her voice soft and soothing. "You are going to be fine, Ulysses. Xavier is going to take care of you. You are going to be just fine." When they were finished, they carried Ulysses into the house and made him a comfortable nest of blankets in the corner of Beatrice's workroom where she could keep an eye on him. The peacock settled into the blankets with a tired sigh, and within minutes, he was asleep. "He needs rest more than anything now," Xavier said, washing his hands in Beatrice's kitchen basin. "Keep him inside for at least a week while he heals. I will come by twice a day to check on him." "Thank you." Beatrice's voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you so much, Xavier. I do not know what I would have done without you. You would have figured it out. You are capable, Beatrice. Maybe, but I am glad I did not have to figure it out alone." She wiped at her eyes, embarrassed by her tears. "I am sorry for falling apart like that. It is foolish to cry over a bird." "It is not foolish." Xavier found himself reaching out, taking her hand in his. "Like you said, he is not just a bird. He is a connection to people you loved. There is nothing foolish about caring deeply." Beatrice looked down at their joined hands, then back up at Xavier's face. There was something in her expression he could not quite read, something tentative and hopeful and scared all at once. "Xavier," she said softly, "can I tell you something, anything? I think I am falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, and Xavier felt like the ground had just shifted beneath his feet. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure she must be able to hear it. "Beatrice, You do not have to say anything," she said quickly, trying to pull her hand away. "I know you are not looking for that kind of relationship. You have made that clear. I should not have said anything. Please just forget I mentioned it." But Xavier held onto her hand, not letting her pull away. "Beatrice, let me finish. I was going to say that I think I am falling in love with you too. I have been for weeks now. I just did not know how to tell you." The smile that broke across Beatrice's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "Really? Really?" Xavier felt a laugh bubble up in his chest, surprised and delighted. "I was terrified to say anything. I thought you would think I was foolish or that I would ruin our friendship." "You could never ruin our friendship." Beatrice stepped closer, her free hand coming up to rest on his chest. "But I very much hope we can be more than friends. So do I." They stood there for a long moment, just looking at each other, and then Xavier did something he had not done in 3 long years. He let himself hope. He let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he could have this. That he could love someone and not lose them. That he could build something new instead of just protecting what little he had left. He leaned down slowly, giving Beatrice plenty of time to pull away if she wanted to. But she did not pull away. Instead, she rose up on her toes to meet him halfway, and when their lips met, Xavier felt like he had finally come home after a long journey. The kiss was gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling like fools. "Well," Beatrice said a little breathlessly, "that was worth waiting for." "It was," Xavier agreed, "though I do wish I had not waited quite so long. We have plenty of time to make up for it." Beatrice laughed, the sound bright and joyful. "Xavier Lawson, I am so glad Ulysses wandered onto your property that first morning. So am I. Xavier pulled her close again, marveling at how right she felt in his arms. So am I. They heard a weak cry from the workroom and both of them went to check on Ulysses. The Peacock was awake, his dark eyes watching them with what Xavier could have sworn was satisfaction. "You think he knows?" Beatrice whispered. "I think that bird knows entirely too much," Xavier said, but he said it with affection. After all, if not for Ulysses and his dramatic tendencies, Xavier might never have met the woman who was bringing him back to life. Over the next few weeks, as Ulysses slowly recovered from his injuries, Xavier and Beatrice's relationship deepened. They were careful not to rush things, both of them aware that they were building something precious that required patience and care. But it was clear to anyone who saw them together that they were in love. They spent their evenings on Beatrice's porch, talking until the stars came out. Xavier told her about his childhood, about the dreams he had given up when his parents died, about the fear that had kept him isolated for so long. Beatrice shared her own struggles, the loneliness of being a woman alone in the world, the pressure she had felt to marry and settle down when all she wanted was to create beautiful things with her own two hands. "You ever regret not marrying?" Xavier asked one evening as they sat close together on the porch swing he had installed for her. "No," Beatrice said firmly. "I never met anyone I wanted to spend my life with, until now." Xavier's heart swelled. "You want to spend your life with me, if you will have me. I know we have only known each other a few months, but I feel like I know you better than I have known anyone. You see me, Xavier, not the quilter or the spinster or any of the labels people try to put on me, just me." "I do see you," Xavier said, "and I love what I see. You are strong and talented and brave. You are everything I did not know I was looking for. So, is that a yes? You want to spend your life with me?" Xavier kissed her instead of answering, long and deep, trying to pour all his feelings into that one gesture. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. "Yes," he said. "That is definitely a yes." By the time November arrived, Ulysses had made a full recovery and was back to his usual dramatic self, shrieking at dawn and displaying his tail feathers for anyone who would pay attention. Xavier had started spending so much time at Beatrice's house that he was barely at his own ranch except to take care of his animals. It made sense, he told himself. Beatrice needed someone to help protect her property, especially after the coyote attack on Ulysses. And she was always busy with her quilting commissions, so he could help with the other chores, but the truth was simpler. He wanted to be near her. Every minute apart felt like wasted time. It was Beatrice who finally brought up the obvious question one evening as they were cleaning up after dinner. "Xavier, why do you not just move in with me?" He dropped the plate he was drying, catching it just before it hit the floor. "What? Move in with me, or I could move in with you. Either way, we are already spending all our time together. It seems silly to maintain two households." She paused, then added carefully, "Unless you think it is too soon, or too forward. I know it is unconventional for an unmarried couple to live together." "I do not care about conventional," Xavier said, setting the plate down carefully on the counter. "But I do care about your reputation. People will talk if we live together without being married." "Then marry me." Xavier stared at her. "What?" Beatrice laughed at his expression. "I am serious." "Marry me, Xavier. I love you, you love me. We want to spend our lives together." "Why wait? Are you really proposing to me?" "I suppose I am. Is that all right? Or did I just break some unwritten rule about men being the ones to propose?" Xavier crossed the kitchen in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. "I do not care about rules. Yes, Beatrice. Yes, I will marry you. I would have asked you myself if I had not been so terrified you would say no." "Why would I say no? I am completely in love with you." and I am completely in love with you." They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other and laughing with pure joy. From his spot in the corner, Ulysses let out an approving shriek. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Gonzales. Mrs. Chen and her family attended, along with a handful of other townspeople who had gotten to know Beatrice through her quilting work. Xavier's closest neighbor, an elderly rancher named Thomas Murphy, who had known Xavier's parents, stood as his witness. Beatrice wore a dress she had made herself, a beautiful creation in cream-colored silk with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. She carried a small bouquet of wildflowers that Xavier had picked for her that morning. He wore his best suit, the one he had not worn since his parents' funeral, and he had gotten his hair cut in town the day before, when the preacher asked if they took each other to be husband and wife. They answered in unison, their voices strong and sure. And when Xavier kissed his bride, he felt like he was kissing his future, full of promise and possibility. The reception was held at the hotel, where Mrs. Chen had arranged for a small feast. There was music and dancing, and even Ulysses made an appearance, having been carefully transported into town in a special crate Xavier had built. The Peacock held court in the hotel courtyard, accepting tribute in the form of scraps from the feast and thoroughly enjoying all the attention. As the sun set and the celebration began to wind down, Xavier and Beatrice slipped away. They had decided to stay in Xavier's ranch house, as it was larger and better suited to their needs. Beatrice would use her old house as her quilting workshop, keeping her business separate from their domestic life. That night, lying in bed with his wife curled against his side, Xavier marveled at how much his life had changed in just a few short months. He had gone from a lonely, cautious man going through the motions of life to someone who was excited about the future, who looked forward to each new day. "What are you thinking about?" Beatrice asked sleepily. "About how lucky I am. About how you and that ridiculous peacock of yours saved my life without even trying. Ulysses is not ridiculous. Ulysses is very ridiculous, but I love him anyway because he brought you to me." Beatrice propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at Xavier with soft eyes. "I think we brought each other to this place, you and I. We were both lost in our own ways and we found each other at exactly the right moment. I like that idea." Xavier reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "We saved each other. We did." She leaned down to kiss him. "And now we get to build a life together. What should we do first?" "First, I want to expand the ranch. With 2 of us, we can handle more cattle, maybe even some horses. I have always wanted to breed horses." "I love that idea, and I want to expand my quilting business. Maybe teach classes for women in town who want to learn. We can build a proper workshop at your old house. Make it exactly what you need." They talked late into the night, planning their future together, dreaming about all the things they would do and build and create. And when they finally fell asleep, they did so wrapped in each other's arms, content and happy and more in love than either had thought possible. The winter of 1878 passed quickly, marked by hard work and growing prosperity. True to their plans, Xavier expanded his herd and began breeding horses. Beatrice's quilting business flourished, and she did indeed start teaching classes in town, which were immediately popular. Money began to come in more steadily than Xavier had seen in years. But more than the financial success, what struck Xavier most was how full his life had become. Where once there had been only silence and routine, now there was laughter and conversation, and the constant pleasant surprise of sharing space with another person. Beatrice sang while she worked, old folk songs from Ohio that Xavier had never heard before. She rearranged furniture and added little touches of beauty everywhere, quilts and curtains and fresh flowers when she could find them. And Ulysses, improbable as it seemed, had become a beloved part of their household. The Peacock divided his time between the two properties, occasionally venturing out to visit neighbors and generally making a spectacle of himself. Xavier had long since stopped trying to be annoyed by the bird's antics and had accepted that Ulysses was simply part of their lives now. Spring came early in 1879, bringing with it warm weather and new growth. One April morning, Xavier woke to find Beatrice already up and dressed, standing by the bedroom window with an odd expression on her face. "What is wrong?" he asked, sitting up. "Nothing is wrong." She turned to face him and he saw that she was smiling. "Xavier, I think I might be pregnant." Time seemed to stop. Xavier got out of bed and crossed to her in 3 long strides, taking her hands in his. "You think, or you know?" "I am pretty certain. I have missed my courses twice now, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings. I was going to wait to say anything until I was absolutely sure, but I cannot keep it to myself any longer. We are going to have a baby." Xavier said it slowly, testing out the words. Then a grin broke across his face. "We are going to have a baby." He picked Beatrice up and spun her around, both of them laughing. When he set her down, he immediately became concerned. "Should I not have done that? Did I hurt you? Or the baby?" "We are fine," Beatrice assured him, still laughing. "Xavier, you are going to be a father, and you are going to be a mother." He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. Our child," Beatrice agreed, covering his hand with hers. They decided to wait a few more weeks before telling anyone else, wanting to keep the news just between them for a little while longer. But it was hard to contain their excitement. Xavier found himself constantly checking on Beatrice, making sure she was not working too hard or lifting anything too heavy. Beatrice tolerated his fussing with good humor, though she frequently had to remind him that she was pregnant, not an invalid. As spring turned to summer, Beatrice's pregnancy became obvious to everyone. Mrs. Chen was delighted and immediately commissioned a baby quilt, though Beatrice insisted she would make it herself. Other townspeople sent their congratulations and gifts. Thomas Murphy, Xavier's elderly neighbor, brought over a hand-carved cradle that had been in his family for generations. "My wife and I never had children of our own," the old man said gruffly, "but I would be honored if your little one used this cradle. It should be full of babies and love, not gathering dust in my barn." Xavier and Beatrice were both touched beyond words, and the cradle took pride of place in the corner of their bedroom. August arrived hot and humid, and Beatrice grew increasingly uncomfortable. Her back ached, her ankles swelled, and she could no longer bend over to work at her quilting frame. Xavier did everything he could to make her comfortable, but there was only so much to be done. They were both ready for the baby to arrive. On a Tuesday evening near the end of August, Beatrice's labor began. Xavier immediately rode into town to fetch the midwife, an experienced woman named Mrs. Santos, who had delivered half the babies in Gonzales County. By the time they returned to the ranch, Beatrice was pacing the bedroom, her face tight with pain. "First babies take their time," Mrs. Santos said calmly, examining Beatrice. "It will probably be morning before we meet this little one. You might as well settle in, Mr. Lawson." It was the longest night of Xavier's life. He stayed by Beatrice's side the whole time, holding her hand through the contractions and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. As the hours passed and the pain intensified, Xavier felt helpless. He would have given anything to take her pain away, to shoulder this burden for her. But Beatrice was strong. Even in the midst of her suffering, she never complained. She focused on the work her body was doing, trusting in the natural process that had brought countless babies into the world. Just as dawn was breaking, their son was born. Xavier heard the baby's first cry and felt tears streaming down his face. Mrs. Santos wrapped the infant in a soft blanket and placed him in Beatrice's arms. The baby was red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect. "He is beautiful," Beatrice whispered, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. "Xavier, look at our son." Xavier looked, and his heart felt so full he thought it might burst. This tiny human being was his and Beatrice's. A new life they had created together, a perfect symbol of their love. "What should we name him?" Beatrice asked. They had discussed names endlessly over the past few months, but had never quite settled on anything. Now, looking at his son's face in the early morning light, Xavier knew. "What about Samuel? It was my father's name." Beatrice smiled, tired but radiant. "Samuel Lawson. I love it. Hello, Samuel. Welcome to the world." Little Samuel turned out to be a healthy, happy baby with a good set of lungs on him. He cried when he was hungry or uncomfortable, but was generally content as long as he was being held. Xavier was completely smitten, spending hours just watching his son sleep or studying his tiny features. "You need to put him down sometimes," Beatrice would say with amusement. "He will not break, and I need my husband back occasionally." But Xavier could not help himself. After 3 years of shutting himself off from love and connection, he now had a wife and child, and he wanted to soak up every moment with them. He had lost his parents suddenly, without warning. Now he understood viscerally what it meant to love someone so completely that the thought of losing them was unbearable. "I am being foolish, I know," he admitted to Beatrice one evening as they sat on the porch, baby Samuel asleep in his arms. "But I keep thinking about all the things that could go wrong. What if he gets sick? What if there is an accident? What if I cannot protect him, Xavier?" Beatrice reached over to take his hand. "You cannot protect him from everything, my love. None of us knows what tomorrow will bring. All we can do is love him fiercely and give him the best life we can while we have the chance. I know, it is just hard sometimes, letting myself be this happy, like I am tempting fate somehow. Happiness is not a temptation of fate, it is a gift, and we should accept it gratefully." Beatrice squeezed his hand. "I know you lost your parents young and that scared you, but you cannot let that fear rob you of joy in the present. We are here, right now, the 3 of us together. That is what matters." Xavier looked down at his sleeping son, then over at his beautiful wife. She was right, of course. She was usually right about these things. He needed to stop waiting for disaster and start appreciating what he had. "You are very wise, Beatrice Lawson." "I know," she said with a grin. "It is one of my best qualities." From somewhere in the yard, Ulysses let out one of his characteristic shrieks. Samuel stirred but did not wake, already accustomed to the peacock's dramatic announcements. "That bird is going to teach our son all kinds of bad habits," Xavier said. "Or teach him that it is all right to be loud and dramatic and exactly who you are," Beatrice laughed. "Either way, I think they will be great friends." As the months passed, Beatrice's prediction proved accurate. As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, he became fascinated with Ulysses. The peacock, for his part, was remarkably patient with the small human who pulled his feathers and tried to chase him around the yard. Xavier often came home from working the ranch to find Samuel and Ulysses in some kind of elaborate game, with Beatrice watching over them both from the porch. "Your son thinks he is a peacock," Beatrice would report with amusement. "He spent an hour this afternoon trying to fan out his bottom like Ulysses does with his tail." Xavier would laugh and scoop Samuel up, delighting in the boy's squeals of joy. His son was everything he had not known he wanted, bright and curious and full of life. And Beatrice was thriving as a mother, somehow managing to balance her quilting business with childcare and making it all look effortless. though Xavier knew it was not effortless at all. He saw how tired she was at the end of the day, how she sometimes fell asleep over her quilting frame. So he made it his mission to help as much as he could, taking over Samuel's care in the evenings so Beatrice could finish her commissions, and hiring a young woman from town to come help with the household chores twice a week. "You do not have to do all this," Beatrice protested when he first brought it up. "I can manage. I know you can, but you do not have to manage alone. We are partners, remember? That means we share the work and help each other. I love you, Xavier Lawson. And I love you, Beatrice Lawson. More than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone." The years rolled by, marked by the changing seasons and the steady growth of both their family and their ranch. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic boy with his father's practical nature and his mother's creative spirit. He helped Xavier with the animals and sat with Beatrice while she quilted, soaking up knowledge from both parents. When Samuel was 4, Beatrice became pregnant again. This time she knew immediately what was happening, having been through it before. Their second child, a daughter they named Margaret after Beatrice's mother, arrived on a crisp October morning in 1883. She had Beatrice's brown eyes and Xavier's dark hair, and from the moment she was born, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. "You are going to spoil that girl rotten," Beatrice observed as Xavier rocked Margaret to sleep one evening. "Probably," Xavier admitted without shame. "She deserves to be spoiled. All children deserve love, but spoiling is another matter entirely. Fine, I will try to show some restraint. But I make no promises." Beatrice just laughed and went back to her quilting. She was working on a special piece, a family quilt that incorporated elements from all their lives. There were symbols for the ranch, for her quilting business, for each of their children. And there, in one corner, was a beautifully rendered peacock. "That is for Ulysses," she explained when Xavier asked. "He brought us together after all. He deserves a place in our family story." Xavier had to admit she was right. As strange as it was, that ridiculous, dramatic peacock had changed his life. If Ulysses had not wandered onto his property that September morning in 1878, if he had not shrieked and made a nuisance of himself, Xavier might never have met Beatrice. He would still be alone on his ranch, going through the motions of life without really living. Instead, he had everything. A wife he adored, 2 beautiful children, a thriving ranch, and a community of friends and neighbors who cared about them. He had gone from being the cautious cowboy who held everyone at arm's length to a man who opened his heart and his home to love and connection. It had not always been easy. There were hard times, seasons when the cattle prices dropped or when Beatrice's commissions were slow. There were childhood illnesses that scared them both and arguments about money and priorities. But through it all, they had each other. They faced every challenge together, supporting each other through the difficulties and celebrating the victories. By 1888, the Lawson Ranch was one of the most successful in Gonzales County. Xavier had built a reputation for breeding high-quality horses, and ranchers came from all over Texas to buy from him. Beatrice's quilts were known throughout the state, and she had a waiting list of customers that stretched out for months. They had added on to the house, creating more space for their growing family and for Beatrice's quilting business. Samuel was now 9 years old, already showing signs of becoming a fine rancher like his father. He could ride a horse as well as most grown men and had a natural way with animals that made Xavier proud. Margaret, at 5, was her mother's shadow, always wanting to help with the quilting or the household chores. She had inherited Beatrice's artistic eye and was already showing talent with needle and thread. One summer evening, the whole family gathered on the porch to watch the sunset. Samuel and Margaret were playing a game that involved a lot of running and shrieking. Ulysses was perched on the porch railing looking regal, and Xavier had his arm around Beatrice's shoulders. "You ever think about that first day we met?" Beatrice asked, leaning into Xavier's embrace. "All the time. I was so startled by Ulysses's scream that I dropped my coffee mug." "You were terrified," Beatrice said with a laugh. "I could see it on your face." "I was not terrified. I was merely surprised by the presence of a peacock in rural Texas." "You were terrified," Beatrice insisted. "But you helped me anyway, even though you wanted nothing to do with other people. Do you know why I fell in love with you?" "Why?" "Because you were brave enough to let me in, even though you were scared. Because you helped me when you had no reason to, simply because it was the right thing to do. Because underneath all that caution and fear, there was a good man waiting to be found." Xavier kissed the top of her head. "You make me sound much more noble than I was. The truth is, I was just lonely and you gave me a reason to try again. We gave each other a reason to try again. That is what love is, I think. Two broken people helping each other heal and build something new." They watched as Samuel convinced Margaret to help him chase Ulysses around the yard, the peacock tolerating the children's attention with surprising patience. Xavier thought about all the years they had been together, all the memories they had created, all the ways they had grown and changed. He thought about the cautious, lonely man he used to be, afraid to connect with anyone for fear of losing them. And he thought about who he was now, a husband, a father, a successful rancher, a member of a community. All because a woman with a peacock had moved nearby and refused to let him hide anymore. "Thank you," Xavier said softly. "For what? For saving me, for loving me, for giving me all this." Beatrice turned to look up at him, her brown eyes warm with affection. "You saved yourself, my love. I just gave you a reason to try. And as for loving you, that was the easiest thing I have ever done." They kissed as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Their children's laughter filled the air, and somewhere in the distance, Ulysses let out one of his characteristic shrieks. It was a perfect moment, the kind that Xavier tried to hold on to remember in detail so he could return to it in memory when times were hard. But even as he savored it, he knew that there would be many more perfect moments to come. That was the gift Beatrice had given him. The ability to believe in a future full of possibility instead of dreading it as something that would inevitably bring loss. As the years continued to pass, the Lawson family grew and prospered. They weathered droughts and economic downturns, childhood illnesses, and the occasional conflict with neighbors. But through it all, Xavier and Beatrice's love remained constant, a foundation on which everything else was built. Samuel grew into a fine young man, eventually taking over more and more of the ranch operations as Xavier began to slow down with age. He met a young woman at a town dance and brought her home to meet his parents, and Xavier saw in his son's eyes the same wonder and love he had felt when he first met Beatrice. Margaret pursued her mother's trade, becoming an accomplished quilter in her own right. She opened her own shop in Gonzales, working alongside Beatrice, and eventually taking over the business as Beatrice's hands grew too stiff with arthritis to do the fine stitching she had once been known for. Ulysses lived to a remarkable old age for a peacock, finally passing peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1895. They buried him under a cottonwood tree on the property, and Beatrice made a special quilt commemorating his life. It hung in their living room, a reminder of the ridiculous, dramatic bird who had brought them together. "I still cannot believe I fell in love because of a peacock," Xavier said one evening as they sat on the porch, both of them now in their 60s. Their hair was gray, their movements slower, but the love in their eyes was as strong as ever. "It was not the peacock," Beatrice corrected. "It was us. The peacock just provided the opportunity. We did the rest." "I suppose that is true." Xavier took her hand, marveling as always at how perfectly it fit in his. "Still, it makes for a good story. The cautious cowboy who found happiness when a quilter and her delightful peacock moved nearby." "It does make for a good story," Beatrice agreed. "And the best part is that it is true. Every word of it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they had worked and loved for so many years. Around them, the sounds of their grandchildren playing drifted from inside the house, where Samuel and his wife had brought the little ones for Sunday dinner. Margaret would arrive soon with her husband, and the house would be full of noise and laughter and love. Xavier thought about the man he had been in 1878, so closed off and afraid, convinced that the only way to protect himself was to never let anyone close. And he thought about all he would have missed if he had stayed that way. His wife, his children, his grandchildren, a lifetime of love and connection and belonging. "I am glad you moved nearby," he said quietly. "So am I," Beatrice replied. "So am I." As darkness fell and the stars began to appear, Xavier and Beatrice rose and went inside to join their family. The house was warm and bright, filled with the people they loved most in the world. There was food on the table and quilts on every bed and pictures on the walls documenting decades of memories. It was not the life Xavier had planned for himself. It was better, so much better than he ever could have imagined. And it had all started with a peacock's shriek on a September morning, breaking through his isolation and giving him permission to hope again. That night, lying in bed beside his wife of many years, Xavier counted his blessings. A successful ranch that would provide for his family for generations. Children who had grown into fine adults, grandchildren who would carry on their legacy. And most of all, a love that had started with caution and fear but had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring. "What are you thinking about?" Beatrice asked, her voice drowsy. "About how lucky I am. About how one decision, one choice to help a neighbor instead of turning away changed everything. It was a good choice. The best choice I ever made." Xavier pulled her closer. "I love you, Beatrice Lawson. Every day I love you more than the day before. And I love you, Xavier Lawson. My cautious cowboy who learned to take the biggest risk of all, opening his heart." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, content and at peace. Outside, the Texas night was full of stars and the distant calls of night birds. The ranch was quiet, the cattle settled, the horses resting in their stalls. Everything was as it should be, and if somewhere in the darkness a ghostly peacock shrieked in triumph, well, that was just as it should be too. After all, Ulysses had always known what his humans needed, even before they knew it themselves. He had brought them together with his dramatic ways and his uncanny sense about people, and in doing so, he had created a love story that would be told for generations. The cautious cowboy had found happiness. The independent quilter had found love, and together they had built a life that was richer and fuller and more beautiful than either of them had dreamed possible. It was a story of second chances and new beginnings, of overcoming fear to embrace possibility, of two wounded souls healing each other through love and patience and commitment. As the years turned into decades, the Lawson family continued to thrive. The ranch passed from Samuel to his children and eventually to his grandchildren. Beatrice's quilts became family heirlooms, passed down through the generations, each one telling a story of the family's history. The old ranch house was added onto and modernized, but the porch where Xavier and Beatrice had spent so many evenings remained, a testament to simpler times. And in every generation, someone would tell the story of how it all began. Of the cautious cowboy and the quilter with her delightful peacock. Of the September morning when a bird's shriek brought two lonely people together. Of the love that blossomed in the harsh Texas landscape and grew strong enough to weather anything life threw at it. It was a good story. A true story. A story about hope and healing and the transformative power of love. And every time it was told, it reminded the listeners that it was never too late to open your heart, never too late to take a chance on connection, never too late to let someone in and build something beautiful together. Xavier Lawson lived to the remarkable age of 78, with Beatrice by his side until the very end. He passed peacefully in his sleep on a warm summer night in 1930, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. Beatrice held his hand as he took his last breath, and those who were there said she smiled through her tears. He was scared at first, she told her grandchildren later. Scared of loving me, scared of losing me. But he chose courage over fear, and because of that choice, we had 51 beautiful years together. Let that be a lesson to you. Love is always worth the risk. Beatrice followed her beloved husband 6 months later on a cold January morning. She died peacefully, her quilting needles finally laid down for the last time. They buried her next to Xavier, under the same cottonwood tree where Ulysses rested. And on her grave marker, along with her name and dates, they carved a simple peacock feather. The ranch continued on, as did Beatrice's quilting legacy. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried on the traditions they had established, building on the foundation of love and hard work and community that Xavier and Beatrice had created. And always, in every generation, there was someone who loved to tell the story of how it all began, the story of the cautious cowboy who had closed himself off from the world after losing his parents. The story of the independent quilter who had never found a man worth loving until she met a neighbor with gentle hands and a wounded heart. The story of a ridiculous, dramatic peacock named Ulysses who somehow knew exactly what his humans needed. It was a love story set against the backdrop of the Wild West, in the harsh but beautiful landscape of Texas in the late 1800s. It was a story of transformation and healing, of taking chances and opening hearts, of two people who found in each other exactly what they had been missing. And it was a story that reminded everyone who heard it that happiness can come from the most unexpected places, that love can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, that it is never too late to let down your walls and let someone in. That courage is not the absence of fear but the willingness to try anyway. The cautious cowboy had found happiness. The quilter had found love. The delightful peacock had found a family. And together, they had created something that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes. A legacy of love that would be remembered and celebrated for generations to come. In the end, that was what mattered most. Not the success of the ranch or the beauty of the quilts or even the length of their years together. What mattered was the love they had shared, the family they had created, and the example they had set for all who came after them. They had shown that it was possible to heal from loss, to overcome fear, to build something beautiful out of brokenness. And they had done it all because a peacock wandered onto a ranch one September morning and shrieked loud enough to break through one man's carefully constructed isolation. It was a small moment, really, in the grand scheme of things. But it was the moment that changed everything. That was the power of love, Xavier and Beatrice would have said. It could start with something as simple as a neighbor asking for help catching her wayward peacock. It could grow from tentative friendship into deep, abiding partnership. It could transform two cautious, wounded people into brave adventurers willing to risk their hearts for the chance at happiness. And once it took root, that love could flourish and spread, creating ripples that extended far beyond the original two people, touching children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, shaping lives and destinies in ways that could never be fully measured or understood. That was the legacy of Xavier and Beatrice Lawson. Not just a successful ranch or a quilting business, but a love story that reminded everyone who heard it what was possible when you were brave enough to open your heart. When you were willing to take a chance on connection, even when fear told you it was safer to stay alone. They had been brave. They had taken that chance. And they had found happiness beyond measure, all because they had been willing to reach out to each other across the distance that separated them and say, "Yes, I will try. Yes, I will risk it. Yes, I will love you." It was a simple message, really, but it was also profound. And it was a message that echoed through the generations, long after the cautious cowboy and the quilter with her delightful peacock had passed from this world into memory and legend. Love bravely, their story said. Risk deeply. Open your heart, even when it is terrifying. Because the alternative, a life lived in isolation and fear, is no life at all. The alternative is merely existing, going through the motions without ever really living. Xavier and Beatrice had lived. Fully, deeply, courageously. They had loved each other with everything they had. And in doing so, they had created something that transcended their individual lives and became part of the fabric of their family's history. And it all started with a peacock's shriek on a September morning in 1878 in Gonzales County, Texas. A small moment that became the first thread in a tapestry of love that would be woven over decades, passed down through generations, and remembered long after the original weavers were gone. That was the story of the cautious cowboy who found happiness after a quilter and her delightful peacock moved nearby. It was a story of transformation and hope, of healing and love, of two people who found in each other exactly what they needed to become whole again. And it was a true story, every word of it. The best kind of story there is.